It's Okay Not to Be Okay, But I Promise I'm Trying by rayrae118. Chapter 13. August passed much the same as July, with the addition of the Weasley twins. They spent much more time at Harry's, now that they had learned that two of their idols were in residence. It was even enough to offset the fact they were willing to visit a professor's home during the summer holidays. Hermione was indeed impressed that Ron had finished all his summer assignments, though he was a little annoyed at how surprised she seemed. It had taken Harry talking with Hermione for her to realise what she had done, and immediately hurried off to apologise. Sirius and Remus had begun giving the students lessons in dueling, something they were all eager to learn. They focused more on using spells together and how to fight rather than formal dueling, so that they could be prepared should a situation arise when they needed to defend themselves. The last of the Marauders also began teaching them how to dodge, reasoning the best offence was a good defence. Sometimes the best way to block a spell was to not let it hit you. Harry was, unsurprisingly, the best at this new class. Defence had always been where he shined, and he was used to dodging. All the lingering apprehension Molly had about letting her children go over to McGonagall Castle every day vanished as she learned that they were actually studying and had already finished their summer homework, yet was still eager to learn more. Even the twins had spent more time on their schoolwork. It made her so proud as a mother, and she vowed to find some way to thank Harry, Sirius, and Minerva. Sirius had taken both Neville and Ginny aside when he noticed their struggles to perform some spells, and upon learning that they were both using family wands, he insisted that they both go to Ollivander's to purchase their own. Augusta required a bit of talking to, but after receiving a dressing down from Minerva on forcing her grandson to use his father's wand, she dutifully took him to get her own. Ginny was a bit more of a problem, until Sirius put his foot down and gave Molly the galleons, telling her that it was Ginny's birthday present and he wouldn't take no for an answer. He then whispered something to her that had her looking at Harry in a new light, but try as he might, Harry couldn't get either of them to tell him what Sirius had said. But the result was favourable, and the next day Ginny was attacking her new lessons with a vengeance, getting used to the increase in power her new 9-inch hazel and unicorn hair wand sported. One of the best parts of the month to Harry, though, was going to get his eyes fixed at the shop in Diagon Alley. Ginny also seemed to have enjoyed that part, now that she had an unobstructed view of his brilliant green eyes. Also, discussed in great detail was what was to happen at the Wizengamot meeting at the end of the month. Amelia and Augusta had planned and were planning to bring the situation to court first thing, when Albus asked for additions to the agenda at the beginning of the meeting. They figured they were as prepared as they could be, so the only thing left to do was wait. Ginny's birthday was a family affair, though Harry, Neville, Susan and Hermione were all invited. Harry had dithered over what to get her, wanting to be special, and had found what he had finally been looking for to be the perfect gift. He had asked Sirius for help, having read about the spells in one of his godfather's books, and Sirius had been more than willing, understanding his reasons behind the gift. Ginny was speechless as she unwrapped the necklace. It was a simple lightning bolt charm on a silver chain, but it was beautiful. Harry was blushing as he helped her put it on, explaining that he and Sirius had tied a few charms to the amulet, which would make her resistant to most mind magics, including the Imperious Curse and possession. Ginny's eyes were tearing up as she threw her arms around Harry's neck. The rest of the Weasleys also seemed grateful. Molly was even trying to hide her tears as she smiled. On August 21st, Harry arrived at the Burrow just before dinner, where he was immediately tackled by a beaming Ginny who pulled him into the kitchen, talking excitedly about the cup and their plans for the next few days. The plan was for Harry to spend the next few days with the Weasleys before they went to Diagon Alley to pick up their school supplies. He would be meeting Minerva in the alley so that she could escort him to Gringotts for a meeting with his account manager. He had been surprised to receive a speedy response from the goblins, informing him he should have met with his manager by his 11th birthday. Dinner was a boisterous affair, as Harry was introduced to the eldest Weasley brothers for the first time. Bill was tall and gangly, with wiry muscles and a fang earring. His red hair hung in a long ponytail down his back. The only way Harry could describe him was cool. Charlie was short and stocky, built along the same lines as the twins. His arms were covered in burns and scars, a testament to the danger of his job. Both were rather cheery, and Harry was able to watch the dynamic of the Weasley children with interest. It was interesting to see where the lines were drawn. Ginny and Percy clearly revered Bill, while Ron and the twins both seemed to consider Charlie their favourite older brother. Bill and Charlie were ecstatic to finally meet the famous Harry Potter, though they were happy because of what he had done for their family, not because of any famous monikers they may have known him by. Harry had done so much for the Weasleys. He had saved Ginny's life, befriended Ron and the twins, and it was easy to see how much their parents adored him. All of the Weasley boys, minus Percy, who was busy in his room with all his work he had taken home with him, wanting to impress his new boss, Mr. Crouch, also managed to corner the black-haired teenager later that night and ask about his relationship with their sister. The twins had filled in Bill and Charlie, and had asked Ron why he wasn't more upset. Ron's answer had surprised them all. It was clear to them that their youngest brother was growing up. He looked them all in the eye and simply informed them that he trusted Harry, and Ginny really liked him back. So who were they to interfere? She wasn't a kid anymore, and they needed to let her live. Harry entered the sitting room and gulped nervously at the wall of Weasleys he was met with. Bill smiled, though it didn't do much to reassure the young wizard. "Why don't you have a seat, Harry? We'd like to talk to you about something." Harry looked at Ron, only to receive a shrug in return. It made him feel better that his best friend wasn't really involved in what was going on. "We'd like to ask you about what's going on with you and our sister," Bill continued, leaning forward intensely. Harry swallowed again. Truthfully, he hadn't thought about it, really. He liked Ginny, and she had become a great friend. What he couldn't ignore was the way his eyes always seemed to seek her out first when he entered a room, or the way he loved reading her letters more than anyone else's, or how he was the one he looked forward to most after seeing every day, and looked forward to least of leaving every afternoon. Harry threw another look at Ron, pleased once more that the youngest Weasley was growing up. A year ago, he knew Ron would have flown off the handle at the very thought of him pursuing a relationship with his sister. He realised now he might as well make or break their friendship. And if he had said the wrong thing, he didn't doubt the rest of the Weasleys wouldn't hesitate to throw him out and never let him come back. Harry sighed. "I'm not really sure right now," he started, holding up a hand as Charlie made a move to speak. "I really don't know what you're asking. I like Ginny. She's a really great friend. But do I like her the same way I like Ron, or even Hermione?" He shook his head, smiling a bit, his eyes going slightly out of focus. "No. She's special. She's different. And I could spend the rest of my life trying to figure out why." Bill blinked. That hadn't been what he had expected. But it definitely showed that Ron wasn't the only one growing up. That was a very mature and heartfelt answer. Harry wasn't quite finished. "Look, guys, I know you care about your sister, and that's great. Take it from someone who knows what it's like not to have family care about you. Ginny's lucky to have you all, and believe me, she knows it. Even if she hates your overprotectiveness, she does know how lucky she is, and she loves you all. But really, I'm only 14, and Ginny's just turned 13. We're young, and we don't have to have it all figured out right now, right? But we're not kids anymore, no matter how much you might disagree. So don't try and say we're too young to see what happens." Bill smiled and nodded, reaching out to shake Harry's hand. "I'll admit, I'm impressed. You're really mature for your age, you know that?" Harry shrugged. "I've had to grow up fast," he replied, smiling ruefully. Bill looked at Charlie, Ron and the twins, all of whom nodded. He looked back at Harry. "Well, I'm glad you realise that you're young, but I guess if it had to be someone, you're probably the only one I would trust with my sister." Harry grinned, pleased to have had their approval. Hopefully he'd help with their parents, should anything develop in the near future. Fred and George moved over to drape an arm around Harry's shoulders. As they led him towards the door, they used their usual magic to lighten the mood. "Just remember, Harry," George, or maybe Fred, started. "You hurt her." The other twin said, "You die," the first finished. Both twins were laughing, but all Weasley boys stopped short when they saw Ginny standing in front of them. Her expression was so much like Molly's at her most furious, it actually made all of them take a step back, even Bill. Harry extracted himself from Fred and George and moved forward, trying to diffuse the potentially stressful situation. "Gin?" he started, only to stop in surprise when her eye immediately vanished when she focused on him. She even smiled. Dang it, he really had no idea what that nickname did to her. Finally, she shook her head. "Thank you for caring, but if you ever stick your noses into my business again, I will make sure they fall off. Bill, I will make you regret ever teaching me the Bat Bogey Hex." Bill winced and nodded. The rest followed suit quickly, not wanting to draw her wrath any more than necessary. And the group all made their way up to bed. They had a rather early start tomorrow. Waking up early was something Harry was used to, but Ron and the twins grumbled all the way to the hill where they had to catch their portkey. Harry just walked beside Ginny, enjoying it thoroughly. She wasn't quite a morning person, but she was more awake than her brothers. They were now complaining about how Bill, Charlie and Percy were just able to apparate later to meet them. Hermione rolled her eyes at that, deciding it wasn't worth to try to get them to stop complaining, so she just joined in on Harry and Ginny's conversation. They were now discussing some of the high points of arithmancy and what they thought Harry would have to know for the test he was going to take in a couple of weeks. At the portkey they were met by Amos Diggory and his son Cedric, who were going into his 6th year, though in Hufflepuff. He greeted them courteously, though his attitude warmed a little when Harry made an effort to actually speak with him. They were able to discuss school pleasantly for a few minutes before Arthur warned them their portkey was scheduled to depart in a few seconds. The two groups separated at the campground, though Cedric waved goodbye and asked Harry to give his regards to Susan, whom he had learned would be in the same box as them. Harry returned the wave with a smile and followed the Weasleys to the reserved spot. He watched in amusement as Arthur wrangled his children into helping try to set up their tent by hand. Hermione eagerly waded into the fray, helping Arthur to determine what went where, and the result was a tent that leaned haphazardly to one side, before Arthur sighed in resignation and used his wand to correct the mistakes. Once they were settled in, Harry and Ginny were sent to fetch water while Ron and Hermione set up the kitchen, and the twins helped Arthur set up the girls' tent. When the setup was complete and the children were given leave to go off and explore, Fred and George wandered off in the search of their friend Lee and Angelina and Licia, two of the Gryffindor chasers whom they had made plans to meet up with before the match. Harry, Ron, Hermione and Ginny wandered in the direction of the stalls that various vendors had erected. By luck, they were able to find Susan and Neville before they wandered too far. Augusta and Amelia had made arrangements for their charges to spend the night in the Weasleys' tents, as Augusta wasn't attending the match and Amelia could barely swing the time to go to the game, let alone spend the night afterwards. The 6 friends wandered around, looking at the various vendors and purchasing souvenirs. Ginny bought a tall Irish hat. Ron purchased a Bulgarian figure of the Seeker, Victor Crumb, and revering the Seeker for his talent. Ginny caught Harry's eye and had to look away before she started laughing. Harry immediately purchased 6 pairs of omnioculars without a second thought, passing them out and overriding any protests. Call it a gift, save your money for something else, or use it to buy me a really awesome Christmas present. He refused to budge, and they were all forced to accept the omnioculars. Ginny grinned her thanks as she began fiddling with a piece of equipment. She knew better than to argue. Harry spent his money on his friends not because he wanted to show it off, or because he wanted to buy their friendship, but because he liked being able to buy things for people he cared about. Hermione also had come to the same conclusion, and she just said thank you to her friend with a smile. They wandered through the crowds a little more, waving to people they recognised. Seamus and Dean were there with Seamus's mother. Katie had joined Fred, George, Lee and her fellow chasers at some point. Hannah Abbott was wandering through the crowd with Ernie Macmillan. Justin Fletchley and Terry Boot and the Patil twins were trying to figure out how to set up a tent. When they returned to their tents, they found that the elder Weasley boys had joined them, and the afternoon disappeared in a haze of stories about Hogwarts from Bill and Charlie, and speculations about what would happen at the match that night. The game was amazing. Ireland had definitely had the better chasers, but their seeker couldn't even compare to Victor Krum, who was the youngest professional seeker in the league and played for his home team of Bulgaria. The twins had confided in Harry they placed a bet with Ludo Bagman that Ireland would win but Krum would catch the snitch. They were trying to save up enough money to open their own joke shop after graduation. Harry vowed to try some of the moves he witnessed Krum making, though he winced at what Aunt Minerva's reaction may be if he attempted the Vronsky feint in front of her. She was definitely a bit Quidditch obsessed, but that would vanish quickly if she thought he was in danger. Ireland was destroying Bulgaria. As they passed the 150-point lead, Harry knew that at this point Krum would most likely give up on waiting until they narrowed the gap. If he saw the snitch, he would go for it. With that thought in mind, Harry began using his own skills to search for the elusive golden ball. At the same moment, he and Krum spotted the snitch. Krum banked into a steep dive, easily gaining the lead on the Irish seekers, and a minute later, Bulgaria's torture was over. The twins were ecstatic that they had won their bet. It took quite a bit of time to exit the arena, after the awarding of the cup by Fudge had been completed, but then the real party began much later. Harry was awoken from his sleep by the sounds of screaming and an explosion rocking the world. Arthur hurriedly woke the rest of the kids up and told them to run into the woods and look after each other, while he, Bill and Charlie and Percy all went to help the Aurors and help try to keep order and find out what was going on. Harry tried to keep the others in sight, but they kept being jostled by the fleeing crowd. With a horrible lurching sensation in his stomach, Harry saw for the first time what everyone was running from. Masked figures were rapidly approaching, holding aloft what appeared to be a Muggle family. Harry's fear turned to anger, and he gave a flick of his wrist, happy to have the comforting weight of his wand in his hand as he stared at the troublemakers in front of him. Ginny grabbed his arm, but Harry shook her off. "Wands out, everybody," he growled. They may need to put what Sirius and Remus had been teaching them to use sooner than anyone expected. Somehow they had lost Fred and George, so it was only the 6 of them. With a gasp, Susan cried out, "My wand is gone!" Neville stepped in front of her as Harry ordered, "Stay back, Susan. Everyone else, stunners whenever you can get a free shot. Neville, Hermione, try to get that family down safely." He didn't give them a chance to argue, not that they would. In a battle situation, Harry had proved he had what it took to take command. And his friends listened to him because they trusted him. The masked men were surprised to see any opposition, so they didn't immediately react when the stunners began raining down on them. Neville and Hermione had gotten the bewitched Muggles down and were trying to help out the others round up whoever these people were. Most of them began to disapparate, not really expecting to having to fight anybody. Harry dodged a purple spell that came at him and came face to face with a white mask. He couldn't see the man's expression, but there was definitely an amused glint in his eyes as he growled, "Enjoy yourself while you can, Potter. You won't be able to for much longer." After a moment, he was gone too, and the 6 friends were left alone amongst the rubble. "Harry!" Hermione's shriek turned their attention to the woods, where a great glowing green skull was illuminating against the sky. Harry felt his stomach drop, even as Ginny's explanation in a hushed whisper at what they were looking at was called the Dark Mark. And it was the mark of Voldemort and his followers. Whenever it had been seen in the First War, it indicated that someone had been murdered at that location. Several pops indicated the arrival of more people, and once more the summer studies proved to be advantageous. They all ducked the stunners heading their way before Amelia recognised the group in front of her and called the Aurors to a halt. She asked Harry what had happened, and so he explained as concisely as possible, though he admitted the threat and the implications behind it, and the fact he had recognised the voice that had issued it. Amelia sent the Aurors to investigate the source of the Dark Mark, and they returned with a terrified-looking house elf in tow. "She was carrying this, ma'am." One of the Aurors handed over a wand. Susan gasped. "That's my wand!" she cried, flinching when all the eyes turned to her. She felt better when Neville wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "When Harry told us to take our wands out, I realised I didn't have mine. It must have fallen out of my pocket at some point." Amelia grimaced as Priore Incantatem was performed, showing for all of them that her niece's wand had indeed been the one to cast the Dark Mark. She vowed at that moment she would get Susan a wand holster like Harry's. The elf, named Winky, was quickly claimed by Barty Crouch, Senior, the previous head of the DMLE. He had been demoted shortly after his son's exposure as a Death Eater, and took up the mantle as head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, while Amelia moved from her previous position to Crouch's. It had certainly created some tension between the two, but she did her job to the best of her ability. Dealing with idiots was just part of her job. Amelia took Susan and Neville home, after Arthur had arrived with the rest of his sons to claim Harry, Ron, Hermione and Ginny. It had been a long night. End of chapter 13. Hope you guys enjoyed this bit dramatic happening here, but I really do like how this is shaping up. It's such a good story, and I'm really hoping you're enjoying it too. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe, and to click the little bell to get notified whenever I upload a new chapter. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye, my guys, and non-binary pals.